I knew what folks in Dusty Creek thought of me, but I didn't give a damn. The only thing that mattered was the little girl clutching her canvas bag beside me on that splintered orphanage porch. Her name was Emma. 12, rail-thin, hair wild as winter sage, one leg twisted up useless under her skirt. Every eye in town seemed glued to us as I helped her down the steps, careful as you'd cradle a wounded foal. The wind carried whispers, sharp, pitying, ugly. That's Morrison, ain't it? Can't keep a ranch above water, but hauls home a cripple for charity. I heard every word. Emma's fingers gripped my sleeve, knuckles white as the frost that morning. Her eyes darted to the crowd, then dropped to her shoes, as if trying to shrink right out of sight. I saw the pain there. Old pain, the kind no doctor can fix. I wanted to pick her up, shield her from all of it, but I knew better than to rob her of her dignity on her first walk to freedom. We passed Mrs. Bellamy, the preacher's wife, lips pursed so tight they nearly vanished. She didn't bother to whisper, "It's not right, Samuel. She ought to be with her kind." I stopped cold, gave Emma's hand a squeeze. "She is with her kind," I said. "Mine." The ride home was quiet. Emma barely looked out the wagon, as if afraid the world might bite her for daring to exist. I tried talking, told her how the cottonwoods would be leafing out soon, how the old barn cat had just had kittens, but she only nodded, eyes fixed on her lap. The sun lit up her freckles and the scar at her hairline, and I wondered what stories that scar could tell. As we rattled up the lane, the house came into view, peeling paint, porch sagging, but still standing. My ranch, battered but alive, just like us. I caught Emma peeking at the distant herd, the windmill spinning slow. "Ain't much," I said, "but it's home." She nodded, but I caught the ghost of a smile when Thunder, my wildest stallion, whinnied from his paddock. I set Emma's bag inside and gave her the nickel tour. A peek at the kitchen, the patchwork quilts on the beds, the row of battered boots by the door. Her limp made each step careful and slow, but she never complained. I could see her eyes mapping every inch, memorizing every sound. Home was a new word for her. By dusk, news had spread. Dusty Creek worked fast. Ranch hands showed up with awkward smiles, some neighbors with pie or casseroles, most with opinions. I heard the Wilson boys snicker, "He's doomed now." Even so, I kept my arm steady around Emma's shoulders. I wanted her to feel what I'd never had as a boy, a place you belonged, even if the world spat at you for it. That first night, Emma ate in silence. When I tucked her in, she finally spoke, voice small but certain. "They don't want me here." I sat on the edge of her bed, boots off, feeling every year of my own loneliness. "I do, Emma, and I don't care what they say. This is your home now." She didn't answer, just stared at the ceiling as if waiting for it to fall in. I stayed a while longer, listening to the wind, promising myself I'd prove them all wrong. Maybe, just maybe, together we'd show this town what real strength looked like. Emma didn't say a word that first morning, just sat at the edge of her cot, feet dangling, as the sun spilled over the kitchen floorboards. I fixed coffee and burnt eggs while she traced circles on the table with a fingertip, watching the dust dance in the light. Her silence was heavy, not sulking, just careful, like she was afraid to make a wrong move in a house that wasn't quite hers yet. After breakfast, I set her battered satchel on her lap. "Come on," I said, trying for cheer. "Let me show you what Morrison Ranch really is." I expected her to shy away from the invitation, but instead she nodded and hoisted herself up with a quiet determination that hit me right in the chest. The limp was more pronounced today, maybe from nerves or the wagon ride. She kept pace as best she could, jaw clenched in focus. We started at the barn, where the old red paint was peeling in long strips and the boards creaked in protest. Emma's eyes widened at the sight of the hayloft and the battered tack hanging from pegs. I introduced her to the chickens, who scattered like bandits at her approach, and to Patch, the three-legged hound who'd been my only company for too many winters. She laughed, a real laugh, when Patch hobbled over and flopped in her lap, tongue lolling. Next, I took her down to the corral. That's where she saw Thunder, big as a wagon, black as night, and mean as a cut snake. "Don't get close," I warned. "He don't take kindly to strangers." Thunder pawed the ground, ears flat, nostrils flaring. Most folks in Dusty Creek gave him a wide berth after he broke a man's arm last spring. But Emma didn't flinch. She just stared, eyes wide, and said softly, "He's beautiful." The stallion stilled. Then, like some spell had passed between them, stepped closer, lowering his head so she could stroke his muzzle through the rails. I'll admit it shook me. Thunder didn't even let me that close on most days. Emma ran her hand along his nose, slow and gentle, whispering things I couldn't hear. For a minute, the world went quiet. No gossip, no scars, just a girl and a horse both marked by life's bad luck. We toured the fields after that. Emma winced with every step but kept going, asking questions about the cows, the crops, the windmill that groaned and spun. Her mind was sharp as a tack. She noticed things I'd long ago stopped seeing. Why's the pasture so dry there? How come the chickens only lay in the morning? I answered as best I could, feeling my old pride flicker back to life for the first time in years. By noon, she was spent, sweat slicking her brow, breath short, but she'd seen every inch of her new home. I lifted her onto the porch swing, set a glass of lemonade in her hands, and sat beside her in the shade. She watched Thunder grazing, Patch snoring at her feet, and for the first time I saw something like hope in her eyes. "You really think I belong here?" she whispered. I looked her in the eye. "You're a Morrison now, Emma. This place is as much yours as it is mine." She smiled, small but fierce. The ranch felt different already. The next morning, Emma insisted on helping with chores. I tried to warn her, told her ranch work wasn't for the faint of heart, but she was stubborn as a mule. Same as me, I suppose. She followed me out, wobbling on her bad leg, face pinched with pain but determined not to let it show. We started with the chickens. I handed her the feed bucket, and she gripped it with both hands, arms trembling as she scattered kernels. The hens pecked and squawked, darting around her feet. When she bent to gather eggs, her twisted leg buckled, and she tumbled sideways into the straw. She bit her lip, but I saw the tears spring up before she could blink them away. I helped her up, brushing feathers from her dress, and made a joke about the hens having it out for newcomers. She gave me a watery grin and tried again, refusing to quit. Next, we moved to the cows. Milking was a whole new battlefield. Emma's hands shook, and the old Jersey cow, Bessie, was in no mood for beginners. After the third spill, Emma's cheeks burned scarlet, her eyes shiny with shame. "Maybe I really am just a burden," she muttered, voice barely above a whisper. The words cut through me. I crouched beside her, wiped her tears with the back of my hand, and told her the truth. "You're trying harder than most grown men would. That's all I care about." By noon, her limp had grown worse, her breathing shallow with exhaustion, but she wouldn't stop. She watched the ranch hands from a distance, how they moved, how they talked, how their laughter carried on the wind. I saw her clutching the fence rail, shoulders hunched, listening as the Wilson boys joked about Morrison's new invalid manager. Rage boiled up in me, but Emma just stared down at her shoes, small and quiet. After dinner, I found her alone at the kitchen table, scribbling numbers on a scrap of paper. She was puzzling over the ranch's feed order, muttering to herself about prices and weights. I watched her for a minute, then set the battered ledger down in front of her. "You want a real job? Help me make sense of this mess." Her eyes widened in surprise. She looked up, searching my face for a sign I was joking, but I meant every word. She dove into the numbers, brow furrowed, tongue caught between her teeth. After half an hour, she'd found 3 mistakes I'd missed in months. "You keep this up, you might just save Morrison Ranch," I told her. For the first time since she'd arrived, she sat up a little straighter, pride blooming in her tired face. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters and the doubts of the day pressed in, I saw her studying those ledgers by lamplight. She might not have the strength for ranch chores, but she had a mind sharper than a branding iron. And for the first time, I saw the outline of a future I hadn't dared hope for. A future where Emma was more than just another mouth to feed. By the end of her first week, Emma had a system for everything. I'd find her at the kitchen table each morning, poring over columns of numbers with the same intensity other girls her age might have reserved for a storybook. She'd ask questions I couldn't answer. Why did the feed bill spike in March? Who signed off on the fence repairs that never happened? Her eyes narrowed with focus, and she'd mutter things like, "This doesn't add up," as if hunting a criminal in the accounts. One afternoon, I hauled in the year's ledger, a battered old thing, stuffed with receipts and IOUs. I plunked it down in front of her with a sigh. "See if you can make sense of this disaster," I said, half joking. Emma didn't hesitate. Her pencil flew over the pages, circling numbers, drawing arrows, and flipping back and forth, comparing dates and signatures. I left her to it, half expecting her to get bored or overwhelmed. But when I came back an hour later, she had a neat list of mistakes and a nervous, hopeful smile. "There's a problem with the hay supplier," she said quietly. "And we're paying too much for grain, by a lot." I stared at her findings, feeling my pride crack open like a thunderhead. All these years I'd run the place by guesswork and grit, but Emma saw the patterns in the chaos. She'd found 5 different errors and a missing receipt just in that first hour. It hit me then. She wasn't a burden. She was an asset, sharp as a tack, her mind always working, never content to sit still or be coddled. I looked at her, saw the way she glowed with purpose, and I knew I'd made the right choice in bringing her here. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I called the ranch hands together. I told them Emma would be helping with the books and managing orders. Some of them laughed, a few muttered under their breath, but most just stared at her like she'd grown a second head. Emma kept her chin high, ignoring the doubters. The next week, I let her handle her first negotiation, ordering seed from the Jackson farm. I stood back, arms crossed, listening as she haggled over price with a confidence that stunned us both. She pointed out the numbers, challenged their totals, and held her ground until Mr. Jackson relented, knocking $2 off the order. Afterward, Emma sat on the porch, breathless and grinning, hugging Patch the dog to her chest. "Did I do all right?" she asked. "Better than all right," I said. "You're running circles around the lot of us." For the first time, she believed it. The ranch began to run smoother. Errors stopped. Money stretched further. Even thunder seemed calmer, nuzzling Emma when no one else was around. But word got out fast. In town, they started saying Morrison's lost his mind, letting a crippled girl run the ranch. I heard the whispers, the ugly jokes, but I let them slide off me like rain. I could see what they couldn't. A future where Emma Morrison was more than a story folks told to feel better about themselves. She was becoming the heart of this place, and I wouldn't let anyone take that away from her. The accident happened on a morning thick with fog, the kind that turns the world ghostly and strange. I was mending a fence out near the west pasture when my horse stumbled, pitching me hard into the rocks. The pain in my side was like fire. By the time the hands hauled me home, I could barely breathe, my ribs cracked and fever setting in. The town doctor poked and prodded, muttering about bed rest, infection, and no more heroics. For the first time in my life, Morrison Ranch would have to run without me. Emma sat beside my bed, eyes big with worry, clutching the ledgers to her chest like a lifeline. I could see her mind racing. Fear, uncertainty, and a stubborn kind of courage battling it out behind her eyes. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her it'd be fine, but the truth sat heavy on my tongue. "You know those books better than any man out there," I said, voice hoarse. "But the work in the fields, the orders, the payroll, it's too much for you alone." She straightened her shoulders, a fierce little flame lighting inside her. "I can do it. I'll hire help. I'll direct the hands. Just tell me what you'd do if you were me." I looked at her, remembering the fear she'd carried her first day, and marveled at how far she'd come. The ranch hands weren't so sure. When Emma announced at breakfast that she'd be managing operations, the Wilson brothers snickered into their coffee. "We're supposed to take orders from a crippled kid now," one muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Emma's cheeks went red, but she stood her ground. "If you want to get paid, you'll listen." Hiring extra hands meant dealing with outsiders, men who didn't know Emma or care about her story. Some of them tried to take advantage, skipping chores or mocking her limp behind her back. But Emma had her ledgers, her sharp tongue, and the memory of every slight. She tracked hours, docked pay for missed work, and kept a close eye on everything from the feed stores to the herd's grazing patterns. At night, she'd bring her worries to my bedside, laying out plans and seeking advice. I told her what I could between fits of coughing. She wrote it all down, determined to get every detail right. The first week nearly broke her. The roof sprang a leak, the well pump sputtered, and a shipment of feed was late. The hands grumbled louder, and neighbors came sniffing, hungry for news of our failure. But Emma held firm. She delegated tasks, solved problems, and made it clear she wouldn't be pushed around. By the time the fever broke and I could stand again, Emma had the ranch running smoother than ever. She'd faced down every doubter, every sneer, and refused to give an inch. I watched her from the porch, shouting orders from her perch on the swing, Patch by her side, and I knew something had changed. The town's whispers couldn't touch her now. She'd found her place, and she wasn't giving it up. Word spread that Morrison Ranch was back on its feet, run by a crippled girl and a washed-up cowboy, as the Wilson brothers liked to say, though not so loud once Emma started docking their pay for missed shifts. The first real test came when the water pump failed in the middle of a heat wave, threatening the entire herd. The hired men panicked, arguing over whose job it was to fix it. Emma listened from the porch, brow furrowed, hands gripping her crutch tight. She called the men together, voice shaky but determined. If we don't get water to those cows by sundown, we lose them. The brothers rolled their eyes. You gonna fix it yourself? One sneered. Emma didn't blink. No. You too. Wilson and Harlan. You check the pump lines for clogs. Charlie, ride to town for parts. The rest of you, water the stock by hand from the creek. There was a pause, a dangerous one. Then, one by one, the men shuffled to their tasks. I watched through the window, pride swelling and fear gnawing. Would they obey, or let the ranch burn for spite? A few hours later, the pump was working. The herd was saved. The Wilsons returned, sweat-soaked and sullen, but said nothing. Charlie slapped Emma on the back as he brought her a lemonade. You've got a good head, little boss, he said with a grin. The men started looking at her different after that, not as a burden, but as the one person who kept Morrison Ranch from going under. She wasn't done proving herself. The next morning, Emma oversaw payroll and ordered supplies, settling disputes between the hands with quick judgment and a sharp word when needed. She walked, or hobbled, more like, every acre, notebook in hand, eyes sharper than any foreman I'd ever hired. One night after supper, the Wilsons sat at the far end of the table, heads down. I expected another round of complaints, but instead Harlan cleared his throat, eyes on his boots. You run a tighter ship than your old man ever did, he muttered. Emma raised her chin. This place isn't about me. It's about all of us eating come winter. For a moment, the kitchen was quiet. Then the brothers nodded, the last of their resistance broken. The rest of the season, the ranch thrived. Cattle put on weight, bills got paid, and even the hands started bringing Emma questions instead of doubts. She'd grown from a shy, uncertain orphan into a leader the whole ranch leaned on. Sometimes, I caught her staring at the hills, lost in thought, and I wondered what kind of woman she'd become if the world would just give her a fair shake. For now, at least, Morrison Ranch had never run better, and everyone, even the most stubborn, knew who to thank for that. Hair, silver spurs, and a reputation for bleeding desperate ranchers dry. He rolled in with a fancy buggy and 2 hired guns, swaggering right up to the house, without a second glance at the crippled girl on the porch. I watched from the window, still healing but strong enough to know trouble when I saw it. Drake leaned on the rail, smiling like a wolf. I hear Morrison Ranch is in need of a miracle, he said, eyes flicking over Emma's crutch. I'll take the herd off your hands for 30 cents a head, before they all starve this winter. The hands bristled, but Emma met his gaze, chin high. That's less than half market. You're wasting your time, Mr. Drake. He laughed. You got fire, little miss, but this is men's business. She didn't flinch. Instead, she waved Patch over, set her ledger on the table, and invited Drake to sit. If you want to talk business, we do it with numbers. He rolled his eyes but sat anyway, humoring her. Emma opened the books, every page neat and precise, every calf and cow accounted for. We've doubled our herd this season, she said, pointing to the figures. Feed stores are paid, debts settled, and our beef is the best in 3 counties. If you want our stock, it's 46 cents a head, minimum. Drake's smile turned thin. He argued, belittled, tried to catch her in a lie, but Emma never wavered. Every question, she answered with cool logic and perfect records. I saw the hands gather on the porch, whispering, disbelief mixing with pride. Even Thunder stood by the fence, watching, as if he understood the weight of the moment. Minutes dragged on. Finally, Drake slammed his hat on the table. Fine. 42 cents a head, and not a penny more. That's my final offer. Emma glanced at me. I nodded, letting her know the call was hers. She shut the ledger, folded her hands, and said, 43, or you ride out empty. He stared at her for a long, slow moment, then broke into a rueful grin and shook her hand. You drive a harder bargain than any man I've met. By sundown, the deal was done. The ranch hands hollered and slapped Emma on the back. Drake tipped his hat to her, genuine respect in his eyes, then rode out of Dusty Creek with a story to tell. The word spread quick. A crippled girl had bested Harrison Drake at his own game. I saw townsfolk peeking through curtains, whispers changing shape. For the first time, they weren't about what Emma couldn't do, but what she'd just done. As dusk settled, Emma sat on the porch, ledger in her lap, Patch curled at her feet. She looked older, surer, her face aglow with a kind of peace. We did it, Samuel, she whispered. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was winning. Samuel's strength returned slow, but by winter's end he was back on his feet, leaning heavy on his cane, but smiling wider than I'd ever seen. Word of what Emma had done had grown into legend in Dusty Creek. Some folks finally offered their hands in friendship. Others only hissed louder, furious that a crippled girl, not a blood Morrison or a seasoned cowboy, now called the shots on the biggest ranch for 50 miles. But Samuel didn't care about town opinion anymore, and neither did Emma. One cold afternoon, he sat her down at the kitchen table, eyes full of pride and something deeper, love, the kind only a father can feel. He handed her a folded envelope. You've earned more than my respect, Emma, he said, voice rough. You're my daughter in every way that counts. I've changed my will. This ranch is yours, now and forever. Emma couldn't speak. Her hands shook as she opened the letter, reading Samuel's scrawl over and over. For the first time since she'd come to Morrison Ranch, she let herself cry. Not tears of pain or fear, but relief and gratitude, the kind that washes years of loneliness away. The news traveled faster than wildfire. Supporters came with pies and smiles, wanting to bask in the glow of the ranch's new legend. Others showed up to sneer, grumbling that Samuel had lost his mind, that Morrison Ranch would end up in ruin. Emma stood tall through it all. She doubled down on her reforms, hiring a few other outcasts, starting classes to teach ranch math and business to local orphans, and, most shocking of all, setting aside land for a school to train disabled youth in trades no one else would teach them. A year later, reporters came from the city. They wrote about the crippled girl who ran a ranch, about Emma's sharp business mind and her stubborn heart. When the government finally asked for her help on new policies for disabled veterans, Emma rode into town in her Sunday best, spine straight, cane tapping the boards as she walked. On the last night of the year, Samuel and Emma sat on the porch, the ranch spread out under a velvet sky. Patch slept at their feet, thunder nickered in the dark. You changed everything, Emma, Samuel said, voice soft. You showed them what real strength looks like. Emma squeezed his hand, heart full. We did it together, she whispered. But in her mind, she knew she'd found more than a home. She'd built a legacy, not just for herself, but for every soul who'd ever been told they'd never be enough.